Oakland, 1951. A 6-year-old boy goes to the park with his big brother and vanishes without a trace. The voice of the narrator cuts through a black screen as old family photos fade into view. For 73 years, his family never stopped searching. Then, 7 decades later, a DNA test yields an impossible result. The missing boy is alive. Dramatic music swells as we see an elderly man embracing a tearful family. This is the astonishing true story of a child abducted in broad daylight and found living a lifetime later. How did one family's darkest mystery finally unravel? Stay with us as we journey through this incredible cold case, one that proves that sometimes truth really is stranger than fiction. Hello and welcome to Cold Case Desk. If you enjoy deep dives into real unsolved mysteries and unbelievable true crime stories, please hit the like button, drop a comment, and subscribe to Cold Case Desk for more stories like this. Now, let's dive into today's case. West Oakland, California, the 21st of February 1951. It's a mild Wednesday afternoon in the post-war boom years of California. In a neighborhood park on Brush Street, children are playing tag and swinging from monkey bars. Two brothers laugh as they chase each other across the grass. 6-year-old Luis and his 10-year-old brother Roger Albino are recent arrivals to the neighborhood. The Albino family moved here from Puerto Rico just a year earlier, part of a wave of immigrant families seeking new opportunities on the mainland. The boys speak mainly Spanish at home and are still picking up English at school. But on the playground, none of that matters here. They're just two kids enjoying a carefree day. Luis is a petite boy with dark hair and an infectious smile. He idolizes Roger, who has a protective streak for his younger brother. On this day, Roger keeps a watchful eye as Luis digs in the sandbox. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows as other children start to head home for supper. The Albino boys know they should be getting back soon too. Their mother likes them home before dark. But just a few more minutes of play, they think. As the brothers play, a woman in her early 30s approaches the park. She's a stranger to them, wearing a bright green bandana tied over her hair. She watches the boys for a moment before walking over with a friendly wave. Speaking in smooth Spanish, she strikes up a conversation. Roger glances up warily at this unknown lady. In 1951, there are no widespread stranger danger campaigns, no common knowledge that kids shouldn't talk to unfamiliar adults. Still, something about the situation puts Roger on a mild alert. But Louise, being only 6 and naturally trusting, gives a big smile when the woman addresses them in Spanish, the same language his family speaks at home. She feels familiar in that sense, like someone from their community. The woman chats with them casually, asking their names and ages. Roger notices she seems very interested in Luis in particular. Then she offers the boys a treat. "If you come with me, I'll buy you some candy," she says, smiling brightly. Luis's eyes light up at the mention of candy. He's just a little kid. The promise of sweets from a seemingly kind adult is hard to resist. Roger, on the other hand, hesitates. Something in his gut tells him this isn't right. Who is this lady, and why is she offering candy out of the blue? Their mother taught them to be polite, especially to adults, but also not to wander off. However, before Roger can say much, the woman gently takes Luis's hand. "Come on, mi niño. The store is just over there," she coos, gesturing vaguely beyond the park. Luis innocently jumps to his feet, ready to follow. Roger trails behind them as they start walking, not wanting to be left out if there's candy to be had, but also increasingly anxious. They exit the park and head down the sidewalk. Roger notices the woman is walking quickly, holding Luis by the hand. After a block or two, Roger's unease grows. This route isn't toward any store he knows. In fact, they seem to be heading further from the Albinos' neighborhood. The woman's grip on Luis's hand is firm, almost urgent. Roger's heart beats faster. At 10, he might not fully comprehend the concept of kidnapping, but he knows when something feels wrong. He pipes up, "Excuse me, where are we going? I thought the candy store was near the park." The woman glances back at Roger. Her friendly demeanor slips just a little. "It's a little farther. "Just keep coming," she replies curtly, still in Spanish. Roger slows his steps. A cold prickle of fear runs through him. He's now several paces behind, and he notices the woman subtly pulling Luis along faster. Suddenly, Roger makes a decision. This isn't right, and he needs to tell Mom. He calls out, "Luis, I'm going to get Mom." Perhaps he hopes this will scare the woman into stopping, but she doesn't even turn around. Roger turns on his heel and sprints back toward home, legs pumping with adrenaline and dread. He yells his little brother's name a couple of times as he runs, but Luis and the woman have already rounded a corner and disappeared from sight. Within minutes, Roger bursts through the front door of their modest home, gasping for breath and shouting in a mix of Spanish and broken English to his mother. Let's call her Antonia, a strong 8-year-old mother of 6. She had been tidying up, expecting her boys home any minute, when Roger came racing in, wide-eyed and terrified. He blurts out the story. A lady at the park took Luis, promised candy. They walked away, and now Luis is gone. At first, Antonia struggles to understand. Her English is limited, and Roger is babbling frantically. But she catches the words Luis and mujer, woman, dulces, candy. And the sight of her eldest son's panic tells her enough. Her baby boy has been taken. Antonia's heart nearly stops. She doesn't waste a second. Still dressed in her apron, she dashes out the door, with Roger in tow, and races down the streets toward the park, calling out, "Luis!" at the top of her lungs. Neighbors turn their heads, and a couple of folks step outside, alarmed by the sight of this frantic mother. They reach the little park. The swings sway empty in the breeze. The sandbox is deserted. There's no sign of Luis, nor the mysterious woman in the green bandana. Antonia's chest tightens. She feels faint with terror, but she refuses to collapse. She has to find her son. She questions the few people still around. "Ha visto a mi niño? Por favor! Have you seen my little boy?" She's crying, grabbing strangers' arms. A teenage girl who was sitting on a bench says she vaguely noticed a woman walking off with a small boy, but she assumed it was his mother and didn't pay much mind. That confirmation sends a chill through Antonia. Some stranger truly has her child. As the reality sets in, Antonia lets out a wail of despair. It's a primal, heart-rending cry that echoes across the emptying park. Roger stands by, tears streaming down his face, feeling helpless and guilty. He's still just a kid himself, and he doesn't have the words to comfort his mother. All he can say, over and over, is, "She took Luis, Mama. I'm sorry. She took him." Night falls on Oakland. What began as a sunny afternoon of play has transformed into every parent's worst nightmare. Antonia knows she needs help. She must get the police to find Luis, and fast. Through sobs and broken English, she manages to get someone to call the authorities. Soon, patrol car lights bathe the street in red and blue flashes as 2 officers arrive at the Albino home. The officers face an immediate challenge: the language barrier. Antonia speaks mostly Spanish and only a little English. The Oakland police of 1,951 have few Spanish-speaking officers. Roger tries his best to translate his mother's pleas. He explains what happened. A woman with a bandana lured his brother away with promises of candy. But as a frightened 10-year-old struggling to communicate, Roger's story initially raises eyebrows. The police ask him the same questions over and over. Who was this woman? Did you recognize her? What exactly did she say? Roger, choking back tears, describes her. She had something green on her head. She spoke Spanish. She said she'd get Luis candy. He didn't recognize her. She was a stranger. One officer quietly wonders if Roger might be making up a wild story to cover for some accident. Child abductions by strangers are exceedingly rare in those days, almost unheard of. Another officer looks around the modest living room of the Albino home and sees family photos, including one of 6-year-old Luis grinning gap-toothed at the camera. This was a real child now missing. Whether or not they believe Roger's candy-wielding kidnapper tale, a little boy is gone and they have to respond. Within hours, the Oakland Police Department launches a citywide search. They start at the park, combing for any clues, a dropped toy, footprints, any witness who might have seen where the woman went. They knock on doors through the neighborhood asking if anyone saw a young Puerto Rican boy being led away. A few neighbors join in, forming small search parties to canvass the surrounding streets and alleys with flashlights as the evening deepens. Antonia can barely keep upright. She clutches her rosary in one hand and a small photograph of Luis in the other, alternating between numb shock and waves of panic. Each time she hears footsteps or a voice outside, she rushes to the door hoping someone is bringing her son back. But each time, it's just another neighbor or officer with no news. By midnight, this has escalated beyond a routine missing child call. The description of a possible abductor, a woman in her 30s, Spanish-speaking, wearing a bandana, has been broadcast to all local law enforcement. Oakland police coordinate with nearby departments. They aren't taking chances. If there's even a possibility a predator kidnapped a child, they have to act swiftly. Early the next morning, soldiers from a nearby U.S. Army base volunteered to help in the effort. Dozens of military personnel in fatigues join police officers and civilian volunteers to scour a roughly 9-block radius around the park. They search backyards, sheds, alleys, any place a child might be hidden or restrained. In 1951, there's no unified 911 system or Amber Alert to instantly spread the word. But local radio stations pick up the story. Missing 6-year-old boy in West Oakland. Possible abduction by a woman last seen wearing a green bandana. The news travels through the Bay Area by word of mouth and radio bulletins. Tips start to trickle in. Somebody at a bus stop thought they saw a woman with a crying boy matching that description. Another person reports a child's shout near the rail yard. Each tip is followed up, but none lead anywhere concrete. It's as if the woman and Luis vanished into thin air. The Oakland police, uncertain if Luis truly was snatched or perhaps wandered off on his own, consider all possibilities. There's a grim theory floated early on. What if little Luis fell into the water and drowned? The park isn't far from San Francisco Bay, and a wandering child could conceivably reach the waterfront. To rule this out, the U.S. Coast Guard is called in. Over the next day, Coast Guard boats patrol the bay and its inlets, searching for any sign of a small body. Divers check the murky shallows around the docks of Jack London Square and other nearby waterways. It is an agonizing sight for Antonia. She hears that they're searching the water, and the thought that the police think her son might be dead in the bay is almost too much to bear. She vehemently insists to anyone who will listen. No, mi hijo está vivo. My son is alive. He was taken. Roger, along with his older siblings and neighbors who know the family, back up the account of the mysterious woman. They try to convey that Luis wouldn't wander off on his own. He was always either with his brother or under watch. Something had to have happened beyond him just getting lost. The search of the water turns up nothing. No trace of Luis. On one hand, that's a relief. No news in this case means he wasn't found drowned. But on the other hand, it deepens the mystery. If he didn't fall in the bay and drown, where is he? A child doesn't just evaporate. As day turns to night and back again, 48 hours have passed since Luis disappeared. The newspapers pick up the story, at least in the local press. The Oakland Tribune prints an article describing the missing boy and the desperate search, even including a grainy photograph of Luis and Roger together, taken not long before that fateful day. The community is on edge. Parents clutch their children a little closer, realizing a stranger abducting a child is a terrifying possibility. But despite the media attention and the intense search, no solid leads emerge. Police detectives interrogate Roger repeatedly in those first days, pressing him for every detail he can remember. Each time, Roger recounts the same basic story. A woman came up to them, spoke Spanish, wore a bandana, promised candy, and led Luis away. Yes, he followed at first. No, he didn't recognize her. Yes, she seemed to know how to talk to kids. No, he never saw a car or a license plate. She was on foot, walking fast. Roger, just a child himself, feels guilty and traumatized. The investigators aren't harsh with him, but they are persistent, likely because they have so little else to go on. Roger's information is the only eyewitness account of the abduction. They must be absolutely sure it's accurate and hope he recalls something more useful, like a distinctive feature of the woman or where she might have headed. Meanwhile, Antonia is living every second in tortured uncertainty. She barely eats or sleeps, instead spending her time at the police station or out with search parties, until exhaustion forces her to rest. Because she doesn't speak English, each interaction with authorities requires a translator, a kind neighbor, or sometimes one of her older children if they know more English from school. Despite the communication gap, the local police come to know her by sight and by unwavering determination. For the first few weeks, Antonia arrives at the police precinct every single morning. Officers see this grief-stricken mother walk in as soon as the doors open, hoping for any news about her little boy. Every day, the answer is the same. No news. No progress. They gently tell her, "Lo siento. No hay novedades, ma'am." Nothing yet. Antonia goes home in tears, only to return the next day and ask again. The empathy of some officers begins to wear thin as the trail grows cold. With each day that passes, the likelihood of finding Luis dwindles in their minds. Other cases and duties pile up. Oakland is a big city, and in 1951, there are many challenges: crime, post-war adjustments, and a police force not equipped with modern tools we have today. Eventually, the exhaustive search efforts are scaled back. The soldiers return to base. The Coast Guard resumes normal patrols, and volunteers have to go back to their lives. A small corps of detectives continues to investigate, but without leads, Luis's case slides into that dreaded category, a cold case. Weeks turn into months. The missing posters that were tacked to telephone poles and shop windows have faded and torn. Tips have completely dried up. The woman with the bandana remains a phantom. No one has come forward with any clue to her identity. There is no physical evidence to examine in 1951. Forensic science was primitive anyway. No security cameras to check, no DNA testing, not even an FBI missing children database existed yet. Luis's disappearance seems to be a tragic one-off incident, with no explanation for the police. It's frustrating and demoralizing. For the Albino family, it's life-shattering. Yet through this darkness, Antonia never truly succumbs to despair. Every single day, she prays for her boy. She lights candles beneath the crucifix in her home, pleading with God to keep Luis safe until he can be found. She refuses to entertain the idea that he might be dead. There is a powerful maternal intuition combined with raw hope that tells her he is alive somewhere. Someone is caring for him. Perhaps that thought is what keeps her going, the notion that maybe, just maybe, Luis is in a home somewhere out there, growing up and living, even if it's without her. At first, Antonia continues her daily pilgrimage to the Oakland police station. Nearly every morning, she shows up, often carrying a small bilingual flyer with Luis's photo, which she thrusts into the hands of any official who will pay attention. The officers at the Missing Persons Bureau come to expect her arrival. Some days, she brings one of Luis's older siblings or a neighbor to help translate and plead his case. One can only imagine how heart-wrenching those encounters are. A mother with red-rimmed eyes wordlessly searching their faces for any hint of news, and the officers slowly shaking their heads in apology. After a year of no answers, some people might have given up, but Antonia is not most people. Though as time goes on, she cannot maintain the daily visits. Life and her other children require attention. She settles into a ritual of visiting the police station once a week. Every week, she shows up and asks, "Noticias de mi hijo? Any news of my son?" And every week, she's met with the same gentle, regretful headshake. Oakland's police, to their credit, do not forget the case entirely. Occasionally, a new detective is assigned to review old files, or an out-of-state child matching Luis's description turns up, and they investigate the possibility, always ending in disappointment. Each year, around the anniversary of his disappearance, Maybe a small blurb runs in the local paper to remind the public that Luis is still missing. But with no new information, interest wanes. As the 1,950 seconds give way to the 1,960 seconds, the world rapidly changes around the Albino family. The older children grow up into young adults, starting lives and families of their own. Roger, the protective brother who witnessed the abduction, carries guilt and trauma with him. In quiet moments, he replays that day in his mind. What if he hadn't let Luis go? What if he had screamed for help sooner or followed further? These unanswerable questions weigh on him. He, too, keeps hoping his little brother will be found. Perhaps he scours crowds wherever he goes, wondering if one day he'll just bump into a familiar face that looks like an older version of Luis. Around 1966, a flicker of hope emerges. Luis would have been 21 years old, that year an adult. If he were alive, he might have had to register for the draft or take a military service exam, as the Vietnam War was ramping up. The Albino family seizes on this idea. Maybe somewhere in government records, a 1-year-old man with Luis's name or birthday might appear. It's a long shot, especially if he was given a new identity, but the family doesn't want to miss any chance. They petition authorities and scour whatever public records they can access. Some family members even travel back to Puerto Rico, thinking perhaps the kidnapper could have taken Luis back there. After all, the woman spoke Spanish. Maybe she had roots in their old community. For a few months, energy is renewed in the search. Roger and another sibling, maybe a sister or brother, accompany Antonia on trips, asking questions, showing photos, chasing rumors. Unfortunately, every lead turns into a dead end. There's no sign of Luis in military records under his birth name. The trips to Puerto Rico come up empty. Relatives there have no information, and no one recalls a random child appearing in the area back in the 1,950 seconds. The disappointment is crushing, but Antonia still does not surrender hope. By the late 1,960 seconds and 1,970 seconds, the landscape of missing children cases begins to ever so slowly shift. High-profile child abductions in later decades, like Etan Pat's in 1979, will eventually lead to changes like faces on milk cartons and nationwide alerts. But all that is still in the future. For Antonia, the only constant is her steadfast belief that one day her son will return to her. Her weekly police station visits become monthly as the years pass. She ages visibly, her hair grays. Wrinkles deepen, but the detectives at Oakland PD still recognize her. By now, new generations of officers have heard the story of the mother who never stopped looking for her boy. When Antonia comes in yearly by the 1,980 seconds, she hardly needs to speak. The desk sergeant will see her and simply lower his eyes sadly. "No news, Mrs. Albino." She'll nod, perhaps shed a tear, and quietly leave, the weight of decades of uncertainty on her shoulders. Inside her wallet, Antonia keeps a laminated clipping from a 1,951 newspaper, the one reporting Luis's abduction. It's folded and worn, but she carries it everywhere like a talisman. She also keeps a portrait of 6-year-old Luis on the wall of her home, garlanded with a palm frond on the anniversary of his disappearance every year. To other family members and friends, it might seem like an obsession that keeps her wounds forever fresh. But for Antonia, this ritual, this remembrance, is how she keeps her boy alive in her heart. She cannot forget, will not forget. Time is merciless. By the turn of the millennium, 5 full decades have passed. The new century arrives, and Antonia is now in her late 80 seconds. Many of Luis's siblings have grandchildren of their own. The family has grown and changed so much, yet one piece has always been missing. In living rooms, at family gatherings, they often reminisce about Puerto Rico, about coming to California, and inevitably, about Luisito. Nieces and nephews who never met him still feel like they know him because the story has been told so many times. He's the legend of the family, the boy who disappeared. Over the years, Some relatives privately assumed Luis must have died long ago, but no one ever voiced that to Antonia. They respected her unbreakable conviction that Luis was alive somewhere. And maybe, deep down, they too nurtured a small flame of hope, however faint. In 2005, at the age of 92, Antonia Albino passes away. It's a gentle death, in her sleep, after a long life filled with both great hardship and great love. In her final years, even as memory began to slip, she would still ask occasionally, "Donde está Luis? Where is Luis?" It became clear she never stopped waiting for him to walk through the door. Her funeral is attended by all her surviving children and dozens of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. As they celebrate her life, they also acknowledge the sorrow she carried to her grave. She never found out what happened to her little boy. A framed photo of Luis as a 6-year-old sits atop her coffin, placed there by Roger or one of the others, an homage to Antonia's undying hope that is now passed on to her family. It seems that any chance of discovering Luis's fate might have died with Antonia. After all, who else would pursue it so relentlessly? The case is 54 years cold by 2005, and the world has moved on. But the story of Luis Albino does not end here. Unknown to his grieving family, Luis himself was very much alive through all those years, living a life parallel to theirs, ignorant of the drama that had defined his early childhood. The miracle that Antonia prayed for was still possible, and it would come about not by chance or by standard police work, but by the powerful, invisible threads of DNA and the determination of a new generation. While the Albino family was searching, praying, and keeping Luis's memory alive in California, what was happening to the boy himself? To truly appreciate the incredible resolution of this story, we must step into Luis's shoes and imagine the life he led, unknowingly separated from his true identity. Picture 6-year-old Luis on that fateful day in 1951, being pulled along by the unknown woman after his brother ran off. We can only speculate about the immediate aftermath, but based on what was later uncovered, some details are clear. The woman took Luis onto an airplane. A shocking twist, considering air travel in 1951 wasn't as common or straightforward as today. Commercial flights did exist and weren't as heavily documented. A child could be brought on a plane without identification or fuss. Perhaps she told airline staff that Luis was her son and he was simply restless or shy. If Luis cried for his mother initially, maybe the woman comforted or threatened him into silence. It's chilling to imagine that moment. A little boy, who likely had never been on a plane before, pressed up against the window as the California landscape receded below, carrying him further and further from home. The woman's face, perhaps at first comforting, might have revealed a harder edge as she kept him under control during the journey. They flew clear across the country, arriving somewhere on the U.S. East Coast. The exact location remains undisclosed publicly, but it's likely a city or town far removed from Oakland in culture and distance. Here, Luis's memory of his old life may have rapidly begun to blur. If he spoke mostly Spanish at age 6, and suddenly he's in an environment where maybe the language spoken is English, depending on who took him in, it would add to his confusion and isolation. We know from later revelations that Luis ended up in the care of a couple who raised him as their own son. How did this come to be? Was the woman in the bandana acting on behalf of this couple, perhaps as a broker or even a relative? Or were they the ones who orchestrated the kidnapping for themselves? That remains a mystery. But what's certain is that Luis found himself in a new home with new parents. These adoptive parents, whether the adoption was legal or, more likely, completely off the records, took in the stolen boy and gave him a new life. They might have given him a different name. In fact, it's probable that Luis grew up under a completely new identity, which is why he never popped up in any of the searches under Luis Albino. He might have been told, "You're our child," or perhaps, "You're adopted and your birth parents died," or some story to explain his origins. We know one thing: Luis believed these were his real parents, or at least had no idea he'd been abducted. By all accounts, They treated him as their son, and he had no inkling of the crime that had occurred. One can't help but wonder if little Luis remembered his early years at all. Did he recall the warm shores of Puerto Rico where he was born around 1945? Did he remember his mother's face or Roger's laughter? At 6, children have solid memories, but those can fade if not reinforced, especially if trauma and time intervene. Perhaps for a while he cried for his mama and hermanos in Oakland, but if he did, those pleas must have been met with silence or deception by his new caretakers. Over time, the human mind often adapts to survive. A young child might gradually accept the new reality, especially if he's treated kindly. We don't know if his kidnappers were abusive or loving in this case. It seems they raised him well enough for him to thrive as an adult. It's possible that apart from the original sin of stealing him, they gave him a decent home. So Luis grows up on the East Coast, the only life he knows. He goes to school, makes friends, learns to speak fluent English, likely losing most of his Spanish if his new family didn't speak it. He probably celebrates birthdays not knowing his real birth family is saying prayers for him each year on that same day. When he loses a tooth, when he skins his knee, when he graduates from middle school, every milestone happens in this parallel universe where he's someone else's son. As the turbulent 1,960 seconds arrive, Luis is a teenager. Maybe he plays baseball or joins the Boy Scouts. The war in Vietnam looms, and like many young men of his generation, Luis joins the United States Marine Corps. Perhaps it was patriotism, or perhaps the military was a ticket to opportunity for him. He may have enlisted or been drafted around the mid-1960 seconds. If only the Albino family had known they were searching muster rolls for his name, but he wasn't Luis Albino in the Marines. He was whoever his new identity said he was. It's one of those poignant ironies. They suspected he might join the military, and indeed he did, even serving 2 tours in Vietnam as a Marine. All the while they had no idea, and neither did he, that he was fighting half a world away from a family who still longed to find him. One can imagine that somewhere during these years, his adoptive parents might have told him he was adopted, if they did at all. Perhaps as he left for the Marines, they shared, "You aren't biologically ours. We took you in as a child." If so, he may have felt gratitude or curiosity about his origins. But if they lied about how they got him, they might have concocted a story that his birth parents were dead or unable to care for him. That would have closed the door on his searching for them. And if they never told him, he would go on believing he was born to them, leaving no reason to dig into any family history. After serving bravely in Vietnam twice, Luis returns to the States as a veteran. He builds a life for himself. He becomes a firefighter, a career that speaks to a character of courage and service. This is a man who runs toward danger to help others, not knowing that once upon a time, danger had come for him in the form of a stranger at a park. By the 1,970 seconds, or 1,980 seconds, Luis is settling down. He marries and starts a family of his own. Children are born, making him a father and eventually a grandfather. These children and grandchildren grow up loving a kind, brave man who they know as their dad or grandpa, completely oblivious to the extraordinary twist of fate in his background. Luis's life appears, from the outside, entirely ordinary, even exemplary. A military veteran, a firefighter, a family man. There's no cloud of suspicion or mystery around him. He likely never had reason to contact any adoption agency or search for biological family because he either didn't know he was missing one or had been led to believe there was no one to find. Through all these years, he's living under the warm embrace of a family, just not the one he was born into. It's bittersweet to think that while Antonia was praying daily for her son's well-being, across the country Luis was indeed alive and well, perhaps experiencing moments of inexplicable melancholy or a sense of something missing without knowing why. Or maybe he felt totally complete and happy, which in many ways would be a blessing. He was spared the pain of knowing he had been taken. By 2020, Luis is about 74 or 75 years old. He's likely retired after decades of firefighting. Perhaps he's enjoying a quiet life, maybe tending a garden, spoiling his grandkids, swapping stories with fellow veterans at the VFW Hall. He's completely unaware that back in California, a large extended family still occasionally speaks his name in hushed tones and wonders what became of him. Luis has lived a full life, but the chapter that is about to open will bring a reckoning of his past that he never saw coming. And it will start with a simple decision made by someone he's never met. His niece, Alida, deciding to take a DNA test for fun. The year is 2020. The world is grappling with a pandemic. People are isolated in their homes, and many are turning to hobbies like genealogy to pass the time and connect with family history. Alida Aliquin, a 63-year-old woman living in the Bay Area, has always been curious about her ancestry. She is one of Antonia's granddaughters, the daughter of one of Luis's siblings. All her life, Alida has heard the haunting family legend of Uncle Luis, who went missing as a little boy. She grew up with that faded newspaper clipping and her abuela Antonia's stories. Even though she wasn't born when it happened, Luis's disappearance left a mark on her family that trickled down through generations. Alida learned from a young age that her grandmother never gave up on finding her lost son. Now, with her grandmother and many of that older generation gone, the tale of Uncle Luis is a piece of family history that Alida figures will likely remain a mystery. At 63, Alida decides to take an online ancestry DNA test, one of those kits where you mail in a saliva sample and get back details on your genetic makeup and matches with relatives. She isn't necessarily trying to solve the family mystery with this test. According to her, she did it just for fun. Perhaps she was curious about what parts of the world her ancestors came from, or maybe she hoped to connect with distant cousins she's never met. These tests have become quite popular, revealing all sorts of surprises in many families. People discover unknown siblings, biological parents, or confirm stories of heritage. For Alida, maybe there's a flicker of a hope. What if something comes up related to Uncle Luis? But after nearly 70 years, it feels far-fetched. She sends off the test and waits. When Alida receives her DNA results online, she likely scrolls through the report expecting to see a breakdown of ethnic percentages, maybe a list of second or third cousins who've also tested. But her eyes widen as she sees something completely unexpected: a close family match with an unknown man. In fact, the DNA site indicates about a 22% shared DNA with this person. That percentage is significant. In genetic genealogy terms, 25% shared DNA typically means a first-degree relative, like a grandparent, grandchild, half-sibling, or an aunt-uncle relationship. 22% is just slightly below that, well within the range for an uncle or a half-uncle. Alida's heart likely skips a beat. Could this be him? Could this be Uncle Luis? She double-checks the information. The match is listed as a man, around the right age. The site might give an age range, or at least she can infer if he's of her parents' generation. She doesn't recognize the name or username shown. This man isn't someone in her known family tree, and the percentage is way too high for a random distant cousin. The realization dawns on her: the only logical person this could be is her long-lost Uncle Luis, or possibly a child of his. But a child of Luis, who would share 12.5% with her if he was her first cousin, would have a lower match percentage. 22% is closer than a cousin. It suggests the man himself, or maybe a half-sibling of hers. But she knows of none missing except Luis. Alida's hands tremble as she processes this information. After nearly 7 decades, could it be that Luis is not only alive, but had also, perhaps unknowingly, taken a DNA test that wound up in the same database? Or maybe one of his children took the test, and the algorithm identified that person as an uncle-level match. If, say, one of Luis's children shares about 12% DNA with Alida, which would be more like a cousin once removed, not as high as 22%, so it's more likely it was Luis, or someone of his generation who tested. The kit might have been from a company like Ancestry DNA or 23andMe. If Luis himself had taken such a test, maybe one of his own kids gifted him one, or he did it out of curiosity too, then his data was out there waiting to be found. With excitement and a sense of disbelief, Alida composes a message through the DNA service to this mystery man. Perhaps she writes something like, "Hello, I see we have a significant DNA match. I'm trying to learn more about my family. Do you know of any relatives from Puerto Rico or anyone who was adopted? Please contact me." She hits send and waits, hopeful that this could be the breakthrough her family has only dreamed of. Days pass, then weeks. No response. Alida checks the website regularly, looking for a reply, or at least to see if the message was read. Nothing. The man on the other end might not even be actively using the website. Some people mail in a test, glance at results, and never log in again. It's also possible the man is cautious or confused by the message from a stranger claiming a close relation. Alida is left in frustrating silence. Is this match truly her missing uncle? And if so, how can she reach him? Eventually, life's distractions pull her attention away. The world in 2020 is chaotic and scary with COVID-19, and perhaps the lack of response leads Alida to shelve the idea for the time being. 4 long years slip by. But even as she returns to normal life, the unanswered question about that DNA match never fully leaves Alida's mind. It lingers quietly, like a puzzle piece waiting to be placed. Early 2024. A lot has changed in the world since Alida first took that DNA test. Perhaps by now she's heard more stories of genetic genealogy, solving mysteries, news stories of cold case crimes cracked by identifying DNA, or reunions of families through these databases. Maybe she watched a documentary or read an article that sparked a thought. What about that match I found? One evening, Alida sits down determined to make another attempt at solving the family mystery that her grandmother died never knowing, finding Uncle Luis. This time, Alida enlists help. Her own daughters, Luis's great-nieces, now adults themselves, join in the mission. It becomes a multi-generational effort. They gather around a computer, digging for any information on the name attached to that DNA match. Perhaps with some clever internet sleuthing, they manage to find a person who could be him. It might be through public records, people finder sites, or even social media. If the man used his real name or a traceable username on the DNA site, they might uncover addresses, phone numbers, or at least some clues. An obituary mentioning his name as a surviving relative, a yearbook photo from long ago, or a directory listing for an East Coast location. In fact, according to later reports, Alida and her daughters decided to hit the library for old newspapers. They realized that to convince authorities, or even themselves, they needed solid evidence tying this unknown man to the little boy who vanished in 1951. So Alida visits the Oakland Public Library, where archives of the old Oakland Tribune are kept on microfilm. She threads the reel and winds back time to 1951, scanning through the microfilmed pages until, with a rush of triumph, she finds the articles about her uncle's kidnapping. On one of those grainy pages, she sees a photograph of young Roger and Luis, taken in the aftermath of the abduction, likely a picture used in the paper to help find the boy. Roger, 10, and Luis, 6, are frozen in time in black and white. 2 innocent faces from a bygone era. Alida gazes at Luis's face in that photo, committing every feature to memory. She has seen the photo before, perhaps, but now it has renewed meaning. If her hunch is right, that little boy grew up to be the man on the other end of that DNA test, but she wants to be sure. If the DNA won't get immediate answers, maybe visual clues will. She takes whatever information she has gleaned about the mystery man. Let's say she managed to find a name and maybe even a picture on the internet. It could be a profile picture from a public genealogy forum, or maybe his name tied to a mention in a local news story. Remember, he was a firefighter. Perhaps there was a feature on retired firemen, or a community piece that included a photo of him, or a Facebook profile of a person with that name. Alida compares that modern image to the cherished childhood photo of Luis. It might seem hard to connect a 6-year-old's face to a 70-something-year-old's face, but family resemblances have a way of enduring. Perhaps she notices that the older man's eyes, or the shape of his nose, strongly resemble her relatives. Maybe he looks like her own mother, or has the Albino family's distinctive smile. Her conviction solidifies. This has to be him. The odds of someone matching that much DNA and having even a passing resemblance are astronomical, unless he's family. And the only missing family of that closeness is Uncle Luis. Armed with the Tribune clippings, photos, and her DNA results, Alida approaches the Oakland Police Department. It's been almost 73 years since the original crime. One imagines the front desk officer's astonishment when this determined woman comes in and says, "I have information on a missing persons case from 1951. Perhaps, initially, they don't know what she's referring to. But missing persons cases are never closed until resolved. She provides the details. Her name, her relation to Luis Albino, the story passed down, and now this DNA match that indicates he might be alive on the East Coast. At first, it might have sounded far-fetched, but consider the timing and context. By 2024, police are well aware of the power of DNA and genealogy. They also know that stranger things have happened in cold cases. The Oakland Police Missing Persons Unit listens to Alida. According to official accounts, on the 18th of March, 2024, Alida formally presented her findings and theory to the investigators. She essentially said, "I think my uncle Luis, who was kidnapped as a child in 1951, is alive and living under another identity, and I believe I've found him." This must have been one of the most extraordinary claims they'd heard in a long time. But the evidence she brought, the DNA match percentage, the old newspaper photo, was compelling. It was enough that the Oakland Police Department reopened the missing persons case of Luis Armando Albino, a case that had been cold for over 7 decades. Detectives who took on this case must have felt a surge of excitement at the possibility of cracking one of the oldest mysteries on the books, and also, perhaps, a sense of duty to finally give this family answers. The police didn't work alone. Given the potential interstate nature, kidnapping across state lines, and the sheer age of the case, they enlisted the help of the FBI and the California Department of Justice. The FBI, in particular, has jurisdiction over kidnapping cases that cross state lines, and even though this was long past, it technically remained an unsolved abduction. The involvement of these agencies meant resources and expertise were available that far surpassed what existed in 1951. It was like bringing a Cold War-era case into the age of supercomputers and genetic science. Investigators verified Alida's evidence and then likely contacted the DNA testing company to get any additional info on that match, perhaps a full name or contact info if available, though privacy rules are there. Law enforcement can sometimes get data if it's a missing person scenario and not a criminal investigation per se. Or they might have asked Alida to message again, urging the match to check messages. Perhaps concurrently, they used public records and databases to narrow down who this man could be. Alida's work may have already given them a name and general location. Imagine the day they find a record. A man with the name, say, hypothetically, John Doe, for this story's sake, as we don't know his assumed name, who is about 79 years old, lives in, for example, New York or some East Coast state, originally from records unclear, since if he had a birth certificate created or falsified, that might confuse things. But they might find an address or phone number. With cautious optimism, FBI agents reach out to the man. This part is delicate. How do you approach someone with news that upends everything they know about themselves? Possibly they started by contacting one of his children or a relative from that side, but likely they went directly to the man to maintain discretion. One day, the man who is Luis, now in his late 70s, gets a knock on his door, or perhaps a phone call. It's the FBI, or an official-looking group of investigators. One can imagine him puzzled. What business could the FBI have with a law-abiding retired fireman? They might ask him, "Did you ever take a DNA test?" Or has anyone in your family? Perhaps he says, yes, he did, a while back, but thought nothing of it. They might then gently explain that they have reason to believe he might be connected to a very old missing child case. He is probably perplexed, maybe in disbelief, or even chuckles at the seeming absurdity. You think I'm a missing person? I've lived here my whole life. You must have the wrong guy. The investigators explain further. In 1951, a 6-year-old boy named Luis Albino was abducted from a park in Oakland. They have strong evidence suggesting that he is that boy. Try to put yourself in his position at that moment. The sheer cognitive dissonance of hearing that you might be someone who was kidnapped as a child 73 years ago. If he had any idea he was adopted, his thoughts might race. Could that story I was told about my birth not be true? If he had no idea, it would be even more jarring. How could I be someone else? Perhaps he laughs it off at first, but the agents present something convincing. Maybe they show him a copy of that 1951 newspaper with the photo of him as a boy. He peers at the image of the little child who vanished, and maybe a long-buried memory stirs. Or maybe it's simply the familiarity of seeing his own 6-year-old face that he barely recalls. Inevitably, they ask for his cooperation to confirm via DNA. At this point, he likely agrees, maybe still thinking this is surreal. But what's the harm in a test? A simple cheek swab is taken. They already have a DNA sample from one of his siblings, Alita's mother, one of his sisters, perhaps, who is still alive. DNA analysis is done, and it conclusively proves that he is indeed the biological son of Antonia Albino, brother to Roger and the others. In other words, he is Luis Armando Albino. What a moment that must have been when the results came in. For the investigators, it's a moment of triumph and astonishment. They have found a person who was a 6-year-old missing child and is today a living senior citizen. For Alita and her family back in California, it's almost like hearing someone found a ghost alive. They knew in their hearts he was alive, but to actually get that confirmation is overwhelming. On the 20th of June, 2024, Alita gets the call she has been waiting for. The investigators inform her and her mother, Luis's sister, that Luis has been found alive. They likely visited in person to deliver this incredible news. Alita later recounted that she and her mother managed to hold their composure during the briefing, but once the officials left, they broke down in tears of joy, gripping each other's hands and crying, "We found him! We found him!" It was a moment she described as ecstatic, an almost miraculous fulfillment of a long-held hope. Imagine the flurry of preparations and emotions that followed in the next few days. They had a name and contact for Luis, but he himself was processing this news too. Did he immediately agree to meet his birth family? From all accounts, yes. He was open and even grateful. Perhaps in that short span between finding out and meeting them, he had to reconcile 73 years of life, built on a certain narrative, with this new reality. He might have felt shock, curiosity, maybe anger toward those who took him, or confusion about what to call himself now. But above all, he must have felt a strange excitement. He had blood relatives he never knew, and they had been looking for him for decades. Just days after confirmation, arrangements are made for a reunion. The FBI and local authorities assist in coordinating what could be a media circus, but the family likely wanted some privacy initially. On the 24th of June 2024, a plane lands in Oakland, a poetic full circle. Since decades ago, a plane took him away from Oakland. Luis, now about 79 years old, steps off, possibly with one or more of his children by his side for support. What is going through his mind as he takes in the sights of California? This might be his first time back since 1951. The smells, the light, the atmosphere might feel oddly familiar or entirely new. At a private location perhaps, Alita's home or another family member's house in Oakland, relatives gather, buzzing with anticipation and nerves. There are likely many people, siblings, nieces, nephews, their kids. After all, he was one of 6 siblings originally, and now only a few might still be alive. We know Roger, now 83, is definitely waiting. Alida is there, the woman who cracked the case. Her mother, Luis's sister, is there. About 86 years old or so, heart-pounding at the thought of meeting the baby brother she never thought she'd see again, or in her case, possibly the brother she never met if she was born after, but regardless, emotionally powerful. The door opens, and Luis walks in. Alida sees the man who she only knew from an old photo and that one match on a computer screen. She has described what happened. He walked up to her and immediately gave her a hug and said, "Thank you for finding me," then kissed her on the cheek. Such a simple statement, but it holds a world of meaning. Luis, in that moment, understood that he had been lost, and someone cared enough to look for him and bring him home. He's expressing gratitude as if she rescued him, though he wasn't in danger in his current life. Being found reconnected him with his identity and heritage in a way he never knew was missing. Tears stream freely as Alida introduces him to other relatives in the room. Perhaps they have out photo albums, eager to share with him pictures of the mother he barely remembers or never knew he had, pictures of his father or grandparents if available, stories about his siblings growing up. Did he know he was one of 6 originally? He might be stunned to find out how large his birth family is. Not long after this initial meeting in Oakland, the next day they traveled to meet Roger, the brother whose quick thinking and courage back in 1951 set this whole saga in motion, and who has carried the burden of that day for so long. Roger is living in Stanislaus County, California, about a couple of hours away from Oakland in the Central Valley. It sounds like Roger by this time might be dealing with health issues, given he would be 83, and did pass not long after. Alida drives Luis and her mother out to Roger's home. One can imagine the quiet car ride. Perhaps they're pointing out California landmarks to Luis, or maybe everyone is quiet, emotionally steeling themselves for the biggest reunion of all. Roger presumably knows his brother is alive now and coming. What would it be like to wait for the brother you lost at age 10 when you're an old man? Did he pace the living room, glance out the window every minute? Did he prepare anything to say, or have questions lined up? He likely was overcome with emotion just at the thought. When they arrive, Alida helps her uncle, who is nearly 80, but still moving spryly, out of the car. They approach the door. Perhaps Roger comes out onto the porch with tentative steps. And there they are, 2 brothers, separated as children, now both old men face to face. Roger looks into Luis's eyes and perhaps, even after all these years, sees the little brother he once chased around the park. Luis sees an elderly gentleman with tears in his eyes and senses a connection, a familiarity around the eyes or smile that mirrors his own. They close the distance between them and embrace tightly. Observers described it as a really long, tight hug, the kind where neither wants to be the first to let go. In that hug, decades of pain and questions are answered without a word. Roger likely whispers or cries out, "Luisito," the childhood nickname, or just repeats, "I can't believe it." Or maybe they don't speak at first, just hold on and weep. They sit down together, arm in arm perhaps, and they talk for hours. There is so much to say. They speak about the day that changed everything. Roger might share details of what he remembers, and Luis can only piece together maybe a feeling or two, if he recalls anything. They talk about the lives they've lived. Roger might share about the family who married, who had children, how their mother never stopped looking for him. That news could be emotional. To hear that his mother loved him so much and believed he was alive until her dying day. Luis may feel a pang of sadness, learning she passed in 2005 and he didn't get to see her, but also comforted that she never gave up on him. They compare notes on military service since it turns out both brothers served their country. Maybe they were even in Vietnam around overlapping times without knowing it. They talk about careers, as Roger hears that Luis was a firefighter, and perhaps Roger had his own career. Maybe he too served, or maybe he worked in some trade. They fill each other in on 73 years of life, in as much detail as time allows. For Roger, this reunion is the fulfillment of a lifetime of guilt and sorrow. Any notion he had that he failed his little brother is wiped away, His brother is alive, he survived, and he's okay. The relief and joy must have been immense. For Luis, it's a gift he probably didn't even know he wanted or needed a chance to connect with his origins, to know who he was and where he came from. Many adopted people speak of a sense of completeness when they find their biological family, even if they had a wonderful adoptive life. For Luis, add to that the shock that he hadn't been given up but actually stolen, and that his family always wanted him. That knowledge can be healing in its own way, validating that he was loved and missed deeply. Over the following days or weeks, Luis meets other siblings, if any are still living, and numerous nieces, nephews, and their children. There must have been a big family gathering where an entire clan welcomed him home. They likely shared traditional Puerto Rican foods. Perhaps someone cooked arroz con gandules or other favorites that Luis might find oddly familiar, or entirely new if his adoptive upbringing was different. They showed him family heirlooms or the small stash of memories Antonia had kept. Maybe she left behind notes or items that belonged to Luis as a child. It's a happy chaos of reunion. It's also overwhelming. Imagine, at nearly 80 years old, being plunged into a huge new family. But reports indicate Luis handled it with grace and happiness. He even spent an extended visit in July 2024 in California, staying longer to bond with his rediscovered family. Time, however, was not completely on their side. Shortly after this reunion, in August 2024, Roger passed away. Perhaps his health had been fragile, and he held on through sheer will to see his brother again. His passing was bittersweet, undoubtedly deeply sad for Luis and the family, but there is comfort in knowing that Roger's lifelong wish was granted. He got to hug his brother and know that he was safe and sound. When Roger left this world, he did so with peace in his heart, instead of the question mark that hung over him for 73 years. In a sense, it was as if Roger could finally let go, having seen the miracle happen. As for Luis, he returned to his home on the East Coast after that visit, but now, with open lines to his West Coast kin, he suddenly had an expanded family who wanted to make up for lost time. It's said that his life from then on would include both the family he knew, his children and grandchildren, who must have been stunned to learn that their father, grandfather, had an entirely different identity and family history, and the family he was born into. The kidnapping of Luis Albino is now a closed missing person case, but an open investigation as a crime. The Oakland police and FBI officially consider the kidnapping itself an active, albeit very cold, case. They have one burning question: who was the woman in the bandana, and why did she do it? After all this time, that question remains elusive. What we do know from Luis's account and the investigation is scant. Luis, having been only 6 at the time, and then living a completely different life, doesn't have answers. He didn't even know he was kidnapped, so he has no memory to offer beyond what might be hidden deep in his subconscious. The woman in the green or red bandana was described by Roger as being in her 32nds in 1951, which means if by some slim chance she's alive today, she'd be over 100 years old. It's far more likely she went to her grave without facing justice or revealing her deeds. She could have been anyone: a neighbor with ill intent, a member of a trafficking ring, or, as many suspect, someone who abducted a child for the purpose of handing him over to a couple that wanted a child. That latter theory seems plausible, given Luis ended up in a stable family environment. It might have been a black market adoption scenario, sadly not unheard of in mid-20th century, when adoption regulations were lax, and there were even notorious cases like the Tennessee Children's Home scandal, where children were abducted or coerced away for adoption. We have no evidence Luis's case was connected to any larger scheme, but the pattern fits. A stranger abducts a child and delivers him to new parents far away. The adoptive parents who raised Luis are another enigma. Did they know he was kidnapped? Or were they told, perhaps by the bandana woman, if she was an illegal broker of sorts, that the child was abandoned or an orphan in need of a home? If they were complicit criminals, it would cast his whole upbringing in a sinister light. But if they were unsuspecting and truly thought they lawfully adopted him, albeit likely without proper papers, then the real villain would be solely the kidnapper. Unfortunately, by the time Luis and law enforcement learned the truth, those who raised him had already passed away, given Luis was almost 80, and they would have been quite old as well. There's no opportunity to interrogate them or learn their side of the story. It's haunting to think that somewhere in old Oakland police files, there's perhaps a composite sketch or a brief description of the suspect. A woman, 30 seconds, bandana, Spanish-speaking, seen on that day. That description never matched anyone at the time, and now it's unlikely to ever be matched definitively to a real name. The paper trail in 1951 would be thin plane tickets weren't tracked like today, and if she used cash and a common name, nothing would stand out. The East Coast side of the journey left little trace unless someone looked for a woman arriving with a child suddenly. Though the criminal side remains unsolved, the triumph of this story is that the victim was found alive. In the world of true crime and missing persons, that is a rare and precious outcome. Luis's case stands as one of the longest-running missing child cases where the child was found alive in U.S. history. It's nothing short of astounding. One might ask, how did Luis feel about learning that he was kidnapped? It's one thing to meet new family, but another to grapple with the fact that the people you trusted as your parents had perhaps deceived you, at least by omission. From what little has been said publicly, Luis seemed to handle it with grace. He expressed gratitude for being found. Perhaps in his mind, at nearly 80, he had the maturity to understand that nothing could change the past, and he didn't seem to harbor publicly known bitterness. If his adoptive parents treated him well, maybe he can even find it in his heart to forgive them if they knew, or at least not dwell on that betrayal. Or maybe he simply compartmentalizes. He has two lives, one that was given to him and one that was reunited with him. For his children and grandchildren, learning that dad, grandpa, is actually someone else by birth must have been a shock too. But likely they embraced it because it meant gaining more family and seeing him happy to know his roots. Many of them traveled with him to meet the California clan, indicating their support. As for Alida, the niece who didn't give up, she's been hailed as the hero of the family. It was her intuition and persistence that cracked the case. The Oakland police publicly acknowledged that Alida's efforts were instrumental and that the outcome of this story is what we strive for. Indeed, law enforcement often sees the heartbreak of cold cases that never get solved. Having a 73-year-old missing persons case close with a joyful family reunion is beyond rare. It's the kind of result that detectives dream of. The Albino family story teaches us never to lose hope. Antonia didn't live to see the day, but her hope was vindicated. One imagines that somewhere she's smiling, knowing her faith in her son's survival was proven true. The family's persistence, combined with modern technology, made the impossible possible. It also highlights the incredible power of genetic genealogy. Who could have guessed in 1951 that the key to finding Luis would not be a witness or a clue in a file, but rather a few cells swabbed from a cheek and a vast database comparing markers in DNA. This is truly a 21st century solution to a mid-20th century mystery. DNA doesn't forget. It carries the truth of who we are across generations, just waiting for someone to read it. As more people enter their DNA into databases, we can expect more of such miraculous reunions for other families and also resolution of crimes that have long gone unsolved. The case of Luis Armando Albino remains technically open in terms of finding the perpetrator, but realistically, justice in the legal sense might never be served. Instead, justice has taken a more poetic form. A lost boy was returned to his family, showing that love and tenacity can outlast even the longest silences. In 2024, Oakland police officially closed the missing person aspect of Luis's case. They no longer have to wonder if he's out there. They know he is home. However, they did keep the kidnapping case active, meaning if any evidence or leads about the kidnapper or accomplices ever surface, perhaps through historical records or someone's deathbed confession from long ago, they would investigate. But every passing day makes that prospect less likely. In the end, some mysteries of this story will remain for the ages. Yet, the story of Luis Albino does not feel incomplete. It has a beginning shrouded in fear, a long middle of unanswered prayers, and an ending filled with warmth, tears, and hugs. It's an ending Antonia dreamed of, one Roger waited a lifetime for, and one Luis never expected. As the documentary-style narration draws to a close, we might see a montage, that black and white photo of Luis and Roger as children, then a fade to the modern photo of Luis and Roger hugging as old men, reuniting. Perhaps a voiceover from an interview with Alida saying, "In my heart, I always knew he was alive. We just had to find him," followed by a quote from an Oakland police detective. "We hope this gives other families out there hope. 70 years or 7 years, you never know what DNA and determination can uncover." 73 years is an unfathomably long time to be missing. But as this incredible true story proves, it's never too late for a miracle. Luis Armando Albino's journey home was overdue by a lifetime, but it arrived at last. His story will go down in history as a testament to a family's unwavering hope and the remarkable science that finally reunited them. Thank you for joining us on this extraordinary journey today. If this story moved you, please remember to like this video, leave a comment, and hit the subscribe button for more compelling true crime documentaries here on Cold Case Desk. We'll continue to bring you stories of justice, hope, and resolution, because as we've learned, no cold case is ever truly closed until the truth is found. Until next time, stay safe and keep hope alive.